I've been helping my mom declutter her house after retirement. Yesterday, I found a journal from when she was pregnant with me, and in it, she wrote that she hoped I'd never learn who my real father was, because he's not the kind of man you ask questions about. It all started with a pretty normal weekend plan. My mom officially retired a few months ago, and ever since, she's been on a mission to finally get the house in order, as she puts it. In reality, that means she wants to declutter 30-plus years of accumulated stuff. Boxes of holiday decorations, my old toys, stacks of paperwork she swore she'd get to someday. She's lived in the same house since before I was born. 3 bedrooms, creaky floors, the same kitchen wallpaper from 1992. The kind of place that holds memories in the walls like smoke. Growing up, it always felt permanent, unchanging. Now, walking into it as an adult, it felt fragile somehow. Like if we moved the wrong box, the whole illusion might shatter. When I showed up that Saturday morning, Mom was already in full gear. Hair tied up, old jeans, an oversized sweatshirt that said organized chaos in peeling letters. The living room was a war zone of half-filled donation bins, black trash bags, and yellowed photo albums stacked like bricks. "Pick a room," she said brightly, tossing me a pair of work gloves. I picked the guest room, mostly because it had the least obvious mess. Just a few sealed boxes labeled in her neat handwriting. Old clothes, kids' books, baby things. At first it was kind of nice, nostalgic, pulling out old Dr. Seuss books with crayon scribbles inside the covers. Faded onesies so tiny I could hardly believe I ever fit in them. Stuffed animals missing patches of fur but still somehow radiating love. Mom would poke her head in every so often, teasing me when I lingered too long over a battered stuffed bear or a photo of me in a ridiculous Halloween costume. It was good. It felt good. Like reconnecting with a version of myself I hadn't thought about in years. Then I found the box tucked behind everything else. It wasn't labeled, just a plain, battered cardboard box taped haphazardly, shoved deep into the back of the closet. At first I thought maybe it was just more clothes or old greeting cards. But when I pulled it out and popped it open, I found something different. Inside was a collection of journals. Not store-bought ones. No leather covers or gilded pages. Just cheap spiral notebooks. The kind you could buy in a pack of 3 at any grocery store. Most were full of household lists, meal plans, scribbled shopping notes. But one caught my eye immediately. It was smaller, thinner, with a faded pink cover, and written in black ink across the front. Baby Journal, 1994. I froze for a second. 1994 was the year I was born. I didn't even realize Mom had kept something like this. It felt intimate somehow, like peeking into a secret conversation she had with herself long before I was even a real person in her life. I flipped it open. The first few pages were innocent enough. Cravings, lots of pickles, mood swings. She joked about crying during car commercials. Little notes about baby names she liked. Nathan, Michael, and apparently at one point, Pilot. Thanks, Mom. There were ultrasounds taped to the pages, little hearts drawn around the blurry black and white images. It was sweet, bittersweet even, until I turned to a page halfway through. The handwriting was rushed. Monsieur, darker. The ink was smudged in places, like she'd been crying when she wrote it. I'll never forget the words. I pray that he never asks. I pray he never wonders. He deserves better than the truth. He deserves a clean start, not the blood on my hands or the shadows tied to his name. If he ever asks who his real father is, God help me, I won't know what to say. Because he's not the kind of man you ask questions about. I sat there on the floor, holding the journal in my hands, feeling like the room had gone cold around me. All the air sucked out, all the happy nostalgia shriveling up and turning sour in my chest. I didn't even realize Mom was standing in the doorway until she spoke. "Find something interesting?" she asked lightly. When I looked up at her, my face must have said everything. Her smile faltered. Her hands twisted nervously in the hem of her sweatshirt. She knew. She knew exactly what I'd found. And for the first time in my entire life, I realized there were things about my family, about me, that I didn't know. That maybe I wasn't even supposed to know. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, staring down at the journal like it might explain itself if I looked hard enough. Mom didn't say anything else. She didn't move, just stood there in the doorway, wringing her hands in silence. Finally, I found my voice. "What is this?" I asked, my throat raw. For a moment, she didn't answer. She just closed her eyes like she was bracing herself against a hurricane only she could feel. Then quietly, she said, "It's complicated." Complicated. The one-word answer people give when the truth is too heavy to say out loud. I looked back down at the journal, flipping further through the pages. There were no more neat little entries about names or cravings. Instead, there were darker thoughts scattered across half-filled pages. Sometimes I wonder if running was enough. I don't know what I'll tell him when he's old enough to ask. I hope he has his heart, not his anger. Every night I check the locks twice, 3 times, just in case. A few pages had been ripped out, jagged edges left behind like wounds. Some entries were barely legible, like her hands had been shaking too hard to write clearly. I looked up at her again. "Was Dad not my real father?" I asked, hating how small and fragile my voice sounded. Mom flinched. She crossed the room slowly and sat down on the floor across from me, folding her legs like we were two kids about to tell secrets in a treehouse. "No," she said softly. "Frank isn't your biological father. Frank, the man I'd called Dad my whole life. The man who taught me how to ride a bike, who yelled at my high school graduation because he was too proud to sit still, who cried when I moved out for college, even though he pretended he had just gotten something in his eye. Not my father, not by blood." I pressed my hands against my face, trying to stay grounded, trying not to spiral. "Who was he then?" I asked. "Who was my real father?" Mom stared at the floor. "You have to understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Back then, I was young, stupid. I trusted the wrong people." I didn't say anything. I didn't want to interrupt. Didn't want to give her any excuse to stop talking now that the dam was finally breaking. She drew in a shaky breath. "I met him when I was 19, she said. "He was older, charming, in a way that felt dangerous but exciting. The kind of man who could talk his way into anywhere, and out of anything." She shivered. For a while it felt like a movie, like I was swept up in something bigger than my boring little life. And then, she swallowed hard. Then the mask slipped. She didn't give me all the details. Not yet. But she gave me enough. Enough to understand that he was violent, controlling. The kind of man who made promises with one hand and broke them with the other. The kind of man you didn't leave easily, and didn't survive leaving without scars. "When I found out I was pregnant," she said, "I knew I had to get away. Not just for me. For you." Her voice broke then. "I ran. I changed my name. I moved across the country. I didn't tell anyone where I went. I started over." She wiped her eyes roughly. "I met Frank a few years later. He knew some of it, enough to understand why I didn't want the past coming anywhere near us. When you were born, he loved you like his own. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, we could leave all of that behind." I sat there trying to breathe around the lump in my throat, trying to understand how the story I thought I knew, the one about a simple, happy little family, was really stitched together out of desperation and terror. Trying to understand that the man I thought I was didn't exist in the way I believed. And that maybe, neither did the woman sitting across from me. Not the way I thought she did. Finally, I asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Mom smiled sadly. "Because I wanted you to have a clean life. A normal life. Not one built on fear." She looked at me, her eyes shining. "I didn't want you to carry the weight of the man who made you. I wanted you to carry the love of the man who raised you." I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to tell her that I both understood, and that I still felt hollow inside. That even though I could see the love behind her choices, it didn't erase the hole that had opened in my chest. Some truths don't fix anything when they come out. They just make things clearer, sharper, harder. That night, after Mom went to bed, I sat alone on the back porch, staring up at the sky. The journal sat in my lap, heavy and fragile all at once. I flipped back to that first terrible entry. He's not the kind of man you ask questions about. But now I had questions. Too many. And somehow I knew this was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I lay in my old childhood bed, staring up at the familiar cracks in the ceiling. The same ones I used to imagine were maps to other worlds. But the ceiling stayed stubbornly silent and my mind wouldn't stop racing. Every memory, every childhood moment I thought was solid kept slipping sideways, bending under the new weight of what I knew. Frank, Dad, wasn't my biological father. The man who raised me wasn't the man who made me. And my real father? A blank shape. A shadow I was never supposed to name. At some point, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m., I gave up pretending I could sleep. I got up, wrapped myself in an old hoodie, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The house was dark, except for the little green glow of the microwave clock. Everything looked the same. The fridge plastered with faded magnets, the scratched wooden chairs, the chipped countertop where I used to sit doing homework. But it didn't feel the same anymore. It felt false somehow. Or maybe not false, maybe fragile. Like I was seeing the scaffolding behind the walls for the first time. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the journal again. The pages fluttered in the breeze from the ceiling fan, making a faint whispering sound, like it was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I reread the entry. He's not the kind of man you ask questions about. What did that mean exactly? Was he dangerous? Was he a criminal? Was he someone famous, infamous, or just violent in the way that scars generations? Was he dead? Was he still out there? I thought about all the years I'd lived without knowing. All the times I'd filled out forms that asked about family medical history and shrugged because Dad had high blood pressure seemed like enough. How much of me was built from someone I was never supposed to know? How much of me was a ticking time bomb I didn't even realize was wired into my bones? At some point, I heard footsteps behind me. Mom! She stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, her face drawn, her hair messy from sleep. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she crossed the kitchen slowly and sat across from me. Her hands were empty, no coffee mug to shield her, no distractions to hide behind. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I nodded, even though my throat was too tight to answer properly. "I know you're angry," she said. "I know you're hurt." I didn't deny it. How could I? It felt like a fundamental part of me had been torn up by the roots and left to dry out on the kitchen table alongside the crumbling memories. She struggled for a moment, then said, "I didn't want you to grow up feeling like you were broken." My heart twisted painfully. "Mom," I said, voice cracking, "you should have trusted me enough to let me decide that for myself." She flinched like I'd slapped her, and immediately I hated myself a little for it. Because she wasn't wrong, not entirely. She did what she thought was right. She tried to build a safe world out of splintered wood and broken glass. But the truth has gravity. It always finds a way to pull everything down eventually. After a long silence, I asked the question that had been burning in my chest since yesterday. "Do you know where he is now?" Mom hesitated. Then, very quietly, she said, "I don't know." Her voice was heavy with the weight of something more, something she wasn't ready to say. "Did he ever try to find us?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not that I know of," she said. But we kept moving for a long time. I changed jobs, changed phone numbers. Frank made sure we stayed off the radar. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I did everything I could to keep you safe." Safe. That word again. The word that now felt like it had barbed wire wrapped around it. Safe from what? From who? From a man who might be out there somewhere? From bloodlines that might carry things darker than bruises? Or from the truth itself? I realized, sitting there in the half-light of the kitchen, that nothing would be enough. Not Mom's reassurances. Not the half-truths. Not even the journal. I needed to know. I needed to see whatever it was she was so afraid of. Because the scariest thing wasn't the possibility of finding something terrible. It was living the rest of my life knowing that I hadn't even tried. "Mom," I said, steadying my voice. "I'm going to find out." Her face crumpled. She nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know," she whispered. And somehow that simple admission, that permission, made everything feel heavier. More final. Like a door had closed behind me, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the house felt different. The kind of heavy, loaded silence that hangs in the air after a fight, even though we hadn't yelled. Even though there were no slammed doors or broken plates. We just knew. Everything was different now. The world tilted slightly, and we were both pretending to walk normally on uneven ground. I found Mom in the kitchen, stirring a pot of oatmeal like it required her full attention. She didn't look up when I came in. "Morning," she said, her voice too bright, too careful. I sat down at the table. I didn't want to push her. I didn't want to hurt her. But the questions were sitting in my chest like hot coals, and I couldn't pretend they weren't burning a hole through me. "Can we talk about it?" I asked. Soft, careful. She set the spoon down and turned off the burner. Then she leaned against the counter, arms crossed tightly over her chest, and gave a small nod. "Ask whatever you need to," she said. But there was fear in her eyes, not anger, not annoyance. Fear. "His name," I said. "I need his name." For a long moment, I thought she might refuse. Then, with a trembling breath, she said, "Eric." Just one word. Eric. No last name. No more details. Like saying the name was dangerous enough on its own. I waited, but she didn't offer anything else, so I pressed a little harder. "Eric what?" She flinched. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Or maybe I did once, but it's been so long, and I never wanted to keep it." It sounded like the truth, or part of it at least. I believe she hadn't kept detailed records, but it was harder to believe she didn't know more. "What did he do?" I asked next. "What made you run?" She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "He wasn't a good man," she said. "Not the way I thought in the beginning." She paused, searching for words. "There were rumors about things he was involved in. People disappearing. Money that wasn't his. Violence." Another long pause. "One night, he showed up drunk, angry, mean." Her voice wavered. "He didn't hit me, not then, but he wanted to scare me. And he did." She swallowed hard. I packed a bag the next day and left. I didn't even stop to think. The more she spoke, the more she seemed to fold into herself. Like each word cost her something she barely had left to give. And somewhere deep inside me, sympathy warred with frustration. I understood why she ran. I understood why she built a new life without him. But at the same time, I was angry. Not because she left him. Because she left me without the truth. Because she thought she could protect me by building a life on silence. And because now, decades later, I had to dig through ashes for answers I should have had all along. "Was he looking for you?" I asked. Mom hesitated. Finally, she said, "I don't know. Maybe for a while, but Frank..." She trailed off. "Frank protected us," I finished for her. She nodded. "Yes." And suddenly I saw my childhood through a new lens. The constant moving, the careful habits, the way my parents were never quite relaxed, never quite rooted anywhere. It hadn't been about jobs or opportunities. It had been about staying hidden. There was one last question, the one I dreaded the most. Did he ever know about me? I whispered. Mom squeezed her eyes shut. I don't know, she said again, her voice breaking. I tried to leave before he could. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. A man named Eric, a shadowy figure with violence in his blood. And me, born into that legacy without ever knowing it. It should have made me feel untethered, lost, but instead it just made me more determined. I couldn't live with half answers. Not anymore. If Mom wouldn't, or couldn't, tell me everything, I would find the truth myself, no matter what it cost. That night, when Mom went to bed early, exhausted from emotion more than work, I stayed up. Laptop open, phone by my side, journal beside me like a talisman, and I started to search. Because the past wasn't going to stay buried just because someone was too afraid to dig it up. Because I needed to know. And because somewhere out there was the other half of a story I had been born into without ever asking for it. The internet is a strange place when you're looking for ghosts. I sat there at the kitchen table, the glow of my laptop screen casting deep shadows across the room, typing Eric into every search bar I could think of. Google, Facebook, old public records databases, and pairing it with my mom's maiden name, with the town she lived in when she was 19, with every scrap of information she had ever let slip about her past. It felt hopeless at first. Eric is a common enough name. Too common. Page after page of strangers smiling from profile pictures, engagement announcements, mugshots, but I kept going. Because if my mother's fear had taught me anything, it was that something real, someone real, was waiting at the bottom of all this. I just had to find him. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I stumbled across a newspaper archive that finally clicked something into place. A local crime report from a town about 30 miles from where my mom had lived at the time. The article was short, just a few paragraphs. Local man arrested after bar altercation. Eric D. Palmer, 26, was arrested Saturday night after a fight broke out at Dewey's Tavern. Witnesses report Palmer brandished a knife during the altercation. No serious injuries reported. Palmer has a prior record of assault and disturbing the peace. Eric D. Palmer. The name hit me like a punch to the chest. Palmer. I didn't recognize it. Not consciously, but something about it crawled under my skin. Something wrong. I dug deeper. There wasn't much. Small-town newspapers didn't exactly keep extensive archives. But what I found painted a chilling picture. Eric Palmer wasn't just some rough-around-the-edges guy who got into bar fights. He had a history of violence, assault charges, a handful of restraining orders, whispers about worse things, things never proven, never charged, but lingering in police notes and local rumor columns like oil slicks, women who moved away suddenly, neighbors who said he had a temper, one brief chilling line in a court record, allegations of coercion and threats towards an intimate partner, case dismissed due to lack of evidence. I sat there, my heart pounding in my ears. This was the man my mother had been afraid of. This was the man who had given me half my DNA. A man of violence and rage and secrets too dangerous to even name. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. It felt like the whole house was listening. Like the walls, the very bones of the place where I grew up, knew this truth long before I did. And then another thought hit me, sharp and cruel. What if he was still alive? What if he was still out there, somewhere? Maybe not even that far away. And if he was... Did he know about me? Did he ever look? Or had I been a forgotten mistake in a long line of mistakes? I shook off the thought. It didn't matter. I wasn't doing this to find him. I was doing this to find me. To understand where I came from. Even the parts of it that were ugly, broken, terrifying. I kept searching, digging through public records, trying to track Eric Palmer's trail forward through time. The records got sparse after a while. A couple more arrests in the early 2000s. A drunk and disorderly charge. A bankruptcy filing. And then, nothing. No obituary. No social media. No mention. It was like he'd fallen off the map entirely. I sat back, rubbing my hands over my face. I was exhausted. Physically, mentally, emotionally. But I was also wired with a strange kind of adrenaline. The kind that comes when you're finally starting to connect the dots on a mystery you didn't even know you were living in. I closed the laptop, gathered the scattered printouts and notes I had made, and stared at the neat stack of evidence. Eric Palmer, my biological father. A man my mother had been too afraid to even name. A man who had shaped my existence without ever knowing me, without ever loving me, without ever deserving to. I didn't know what I was going to do with this information yet. I didn't know if I wanted to find him, if he was even findable. But I knew one thing. I was done living in the dark. And somewhere deep in the pit of my stomach, I could feel it. The worst was still ahead. Because you can't dig up the past without uncovering things that don't want to stay buried. And now that I had started, there was no way to put it back. I spent the next few days in a daze, walking around Mom's house, helping her pack up junk drawers and sort through old clothes, pretending that everything was normal. Pretending that the journal wasn't burning a hole in the back of my mind. pretending that I hadn't uncovered a thread leading straight back to a man who represented everything dark and violent and unknowable about where I came from. Mom didn't ask what I had found. Maybe she didn't want to know. Maybe she was afraid that if she asked, I would actually tell her. And some part of me was glad, because I wasn't sure I could explain it yet without everything spilling out in a flood I couldn't control. At night, I kept digging, obsession creeping in the way it always does when you're chasing something that feels like it defines you. Every scrap of information about Eric Palmer, every mugshot, every court filing, every whisper of a life spent slipping through cracks. And finally, I found something. It was a small lead, barely more than a breadcrumb. A real estate filing, buried deep in public county records from about 5 years ago. An abandoned property transfer involving an Eric D. Palmer. The address was in a town called Marion Ridge, about 2 hours south of where we lived. A place I had never heard of. Tiny. Remote. The kind of place you move to when you don't want to be found. I stared at the address on the screen. It wasn't much, but it was more than I had before. Maybe he had lived there once. Maybe he still did. Maybe he was dead. Maybe he had disappeared into the ether the way dangerous men sometimes do, slipping away before anyone can pin them down long enough to make them answer for anything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Marion Ridge was the next step. That if I wanted to understand this thing, this bloodstain stitched into the fabric of who I was, I had to go there. I had to see it, even if it led nowhere, even if it was dangerous. Especially then, I printed out the address, folded it neatly, slid it into the back pocket of my jeans like a secret. And when Mom asked if I could run a few errands the next day, take a load of donations to the Goodwill, pick up some groceries, I said sure. I didn't tell her what else I was planning. I didn't tell her that I was going to Marion Ridge. Somehow I think she knew anyway. There was a sadness in her eyes when she kissed me goodbye that morning. A heavy, hollow look that said, "Go if you must, but you won't find what you think you're looking for." The drive to Marion Ridge was longer than I expected. Long stretches of cracked highways, empty fields, worn-down gas stations where the clerks didn't bother to make small talk. The kind of place where time felt like it had been paused a few decades ago and nobody noticed or cared. I followed the GPS as it wound me off the main roads and into narrower streets lined with trailer homes, rusted trucks on cinder blocks, peeling paint. And then finally I found it, the address from the filing. It wasn't a house anymore, just a skeleton. An abandoned trailer home, windows shattered, front door hanging off its hinges. The yard was a patchy expanse of dirt and weeds, choked with old beer cans and broken furniture. The whole place reeked of abandonment, of something gone sour long before I ever got there. I parked on the side of the cracked road and sat there for a minute, engine idling, heart hammering. What did I think I was going to find? A man sitting on the porch waiting for me? Some grand revelation spelled out in broken glass and empty bottles? No. But I couldn't leave without looking, without knowing. I killed the engine, got out of the car, and crossed the weedy lot toward the trailer. The closer I got, the worse the place smelled. Mildew, rot, something sharp and chemical. I climbed the creaking steps and pushed the door open wider with my foot. Inside it was worse. Stripped bare, graffiti on the walls, rotting floorboards, piles of garbage in the corners. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a carcass. Still, I stepped inside. Still, I searched. Still, I needed something. Anything. Proof that this place had once belonged to Eric Palmer. Proof that he had once existed outside of my mother's worst memories and my own blood. In what might have once been a bedroom, I found it. A scrap of mail. Half-shredded, water-damaged, but still barely legible. A crumpled envelope addressed to Eric Palmer. No return address. No sender's name. Just one chilling line scrawled across the back in thick black marker. "Don't come back." I stood there, staring at the words, my mouth dry. Someone had wanted him gone. Someone had made sure he stayed gone. And now, so many years later, all that remained was this. A wrecked trailer, a warning, and the ghost of a man I had never truly known. I walked back to my car, the envelope folded carefully in my hand. I sat there for a long time before starting the engine, listening to the quiet, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. Not fear exactly, something worse. The cold realization that there are some questions you don't get to ask. Some stories you don't get to finish. Some fathers you don't get to meet. And maybe shouldn't. I didn't drive straight home. I couldn't. Not after standing in the ruins of that trailer. Not after seeing that envelope with its brutal message scrawled across the back. Instead, I pulled into a cracked parking lot behind an abandoned diner and sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled, trying to figure out what to do next. I could feel it. The way the past was pressing in from all sides now. Closer, heavier, unavoidable. I pulled out my phone and started searching again. This time I dug deeper, more specific. Not just Eric Palmer anymore, but Eric Palmer Marion Ridge, Eric Palmer criminal record, Eric Palmer disappearance. And finally I found something. Not a full article, not an obituary, just a snippet of a local crime blog tucked behind a paywall. Eric Palmer, previously known for a string of violent offenses, has been missing since 2017 after allegedly becoming involved in a series of illicit activities tied to the outlaw community in southern counties. Multiple sources claim Palmer fled after making enemies he couldn't pay off. Official records list him as a missing person, presumed deceased. Presumed deceased? Those two words hit harder than I expected. Not confirmed, not final, just presumed. A man so dangerous, so volatile, that even the people chasing him eventually gave up, or decided he wasn't worth the trouble anymore. And somehow this man, this ghost, this cautionary tale, was my father, my blood, my beginning. I sat there with the phone clutched in my hand, the screen gone dark, feeling like the ground underneath me was crumbling away. What did that make me? What did it mean about the parts of myself I didn't understand? The flashes of temper I hated, the restless anger I couldn't always explain. Were they pieces of him bleeding through? Were they proof that no matter how much Frank had loved me, no matter how much Mom had tried to build a life far away from all of this, the darkness was still buried in my DNA? For a long time I didn't move, didn't think, just sat there, existing. Eventually I drove home. The sky had turned the deep bruised purple of early evening by the time I pulled into Mom's driveway. She was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, a mug of tea cradled in her hands. She didn't ask where I'd been, just looked at me with those tired, knowing eyes and nodded slightly. Like she understood that some journeys you have to take alone, even if you come back carrying things too heavy to set down. We didn't say much that night. I sat on the couch. She sat in her chair. The TV played some rerun sitcom neither of us really watched. And for the first time since I found the journal, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was forgiving. It was an acknowledgement that we had both survived things we didn't fully understand. That love wasn't built on blood or perfect stories. It was built on choosing each other, over and over again, even when the foundation cracked. Before I went to bed, I asked her one last question, one I was finally ready to hear the answer to. Would you have told me? She looked at me for a long time, then said, someday, when I thought you were strong enough, when I thought it wouldn't break you. She gave a sad little smile. But maybe I waited too long. Maybe I was waiting for a perfect moment that doesn't exist. I nodded, because I understood. Because there is no perfect moment to tell a child that half their DNA comes from a man you prayed they'd never meet. That night, lying awake in the dark, I thought about Eric Palmer. Somewhere out there, dead or alive. A man who had shaped me without ever touching me. A man who had taught me through absence and fear that the past can only control you if you let it. And I thought about Frank, the man who chose to be my father, even when he didn't have to. Who built a life for me, not out of blood, but out of stubborn, enduring love. And I thought about Mom, sitting in the dark, carrying secrets so heavy that it had bent her for decades, but who still showed up every day doing her best. I wasn't defined by Eric Palmer. I wasn't his shadow. I wasn't his legacy. I was my own, and no journal, no bloodline, no forgotten trailer in a dead-end town could change that. The next morning, the world felt different, not fixed, not healed, just quieter. Like the storm had passed, even if it left the landscape rearranged in ways that would take a lifetime to fully understand. I sat outside on Mom's back porch, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, watching the early sun burn mist off the neighbor's lawn. The journal lay beside me on the table. I'd thought about destroying it, burning it, burying it, leaving it in some nameless storage unit to rot. But in the end, I couldn't. It wasn't just a record of fear. It was a record of survival. It was proof that my mother, terrified, alone, young and scarred, had still fought to build something better for me. Proof that the darkness hadn't won. I thought about Eric Palmer, the man whose blood ran through my veins, somewhere between myth and monster. Not a father, not even really a ghost, just a fact, a name without a face now. And maybe that was all he had ever deserved to be. I thought about Frank, too, the man who had been there for every Christmas morning, every scraped knee, every stupid teenage meltdown. The man who taught me how to be good, how to be stubborn, how to fight for the people you love, not with fists, but with a life built from small, everyday kindnesses. He was the one who mattered, the man who chose me. Blood or no blood, I didn't know if I'd ever tell Frank's memory thank you properly. Didn't know if I'd ever be able to sit down with Mom and talk about it all without the ache rising in my throat. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point wasn't to fix it. Maybe the point was just to live with it, to carry it forward. The good and the bad, the broken pieces and the shining ones, without letting it hollow me out, without letting it turn me into a shadow of someone else's sins. Later that afternoon, before I left to drive back to my own apartment, Mom pressed something into my hand. A photo. It was old, the corners bent and yellowed. Me, about 5 years old, sitting on Frank's shoulders at a county fair, a giant stuffed animal clutched in my arms. Both of us were laughing. Big, open-mouthed, unguarded laughter.
Real.
True.
Undeniable.
You always had a father, Mom said quietly, her eyes shining. Maybe not the one you expected. Maybe not the one who gave you your blood, but the one who gave you your life. I couldn't speak for a moment, could barely breathe around the lump in my throat. I just nodded. Because she was right, and because I finally believed it. I tucked the photo into my wallet behind my driver's license and insurance card. A reminder, a promise, not of what I came from, but of who I chose to be. Maybe I would always wonder a little. Maybe, sometimes late at night, I'd think about the parts of me that felt jagged, restless, hard to explain. Maybe there would always be questions, but I wouldn't let them define me. I had survived before I even knew what I was surviving, and now I was free to live, to love, to build something better. Not because my blood demanded it, but because my heart did. Because in the end, we are not just the sum of where we come from. We are what we decide to be. We are who we choose to become, and I choose to be more.